Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Chatham House. I'm delighted you could join us today. I'm Robin Niblett, Director of the Institute. Welcome to you. Thank you very much for joining us. Welcome also to our members who are joining us on a live stream of this event today, which perhaps obviously, just with the press we have here, is on the record. I'm delighted that we're able to welcome the President of the European Council, Herman Van Rompuy, to Chatham House to talk about the power of the Union, Europe, its neighbourhood, and the world. And I think fittingly for a discussion at Chatham House, we're going to have an opportunity to think through his eyes and his perspective about the potential that the EU has, as the title indicates, not just within its neighbourhood, which has been undergoing such profound changes these past couple of years, but also looking internationally. Inevitably, there is a connectivity between the international capacities of the European Union and its internal evolution and development, and I know we will have plenty of time to get to those issues in the question and answer. As I think everyone here knows, Herman Van Rompuy became the first long-term President of the European Council under the Lisbon Treaty arrangements, taking up this position in December 2009. In that role, which I think would be important under any circumstances, but which inevitably has become critical given the euro crisis that's been taking place these last couple of years, he's really had to take the role of a chairman into new and uncharted territories, in particular given the fact that member states have had to make such vital adjustments to perhaps what they thought they'd got into when they had engaged with the Eurozone and perhaps with the European Union as a whole. He has chaired in particular during this process the economic governance dimensions of the European Union, having been instrumental in the establishment of the European Financial Stability Mechanism and the European Financial Stability Facility, and obviously continues to play critical roles in each of the evolutionary institution steps that are taking place right now to try to deal with this crisis. But he is a skilled negotiator and consensus builder, and I think it would be fair to say one of the senior European figures who to date is coming out with his reputation enhanced from this crisis. And he's somebody who has brought to the position of European Council President extensive experience, having served as Prime Minister of Belgium, having served in the late 1990s as well as Vice Prime Minister and Minister of the Budget in the governments of Jean-Luc Dehaene. He has also published widely, 8 books by the count here. So somebody who will bring both deep political knowledge but also broader and strategic perspective to the topic. President Van Rompuy, welcome to Chatham House. We look forward to your remarks and to having some time to engage in conversation.
Mr. Chairman, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is a pleasure, of course, to be here in London, in the center of strategic thinking that is Chatham House. I will leave this afternoon for Berlin. I will make a speech in Berlin under Chatham House rules. These are obvious, unusual times for Europe, at least you can say. Today, a referendum in Ireland, the banks in Spain, opinion polls in Greece, every day brings its share of headlines. Every day has its burden. On a more personal note, today also happens to be the last day of my first term in office as President of the European Council. Tomorrow starts my second mandate. I hope that the second 2.5 years will see fewer storms. I have come here first and foremost to share some thoughts with you on Europe's foreign policy, even if we can touch upon other issues in the Q&A. European leaders remain fully engaged in global matters. The G8 summit in Camp David and the NATO summit in Chicago, which I both attended, are recent examples. For reasons I will explain, worries voiced by some experts that Europe's foreign policy is falling victim to the public debt crisis seem to me an exaggeration, but we have been weakened by the crisis. A common foreign policy is also a matter of disproportionate expectations. We cannot expect Europe to suddenly turn into a new superpower. I'm an expert at avoiding this trap. I built my career on lowering expectations. So I come out of this crisis with an enhanced reputation, as you said, but the expectation was so low that I... Yet, we should not fall into the opposite trap. Europe is not becoming a disengaged spectator. All 27 member states are committed to making a difference in the world through their own actions and jointly, and not least, the United Kingdom. Ladies and gentlemen, I would first like to set the scene. The world has changed completely over the last 25 years, completely. At the risk of stating the obvious here in Chatham House, I feel it's worthwhile to mention what I see as three main trends. One, the stage is getting more crowded. Two, the public comes closer to the stage than ever before, even to the extent of itself becoming an actor. And three, the nature of the play is changing. You may notice I use metaphors from the theater. These may be less fashionable today in the field of foreign affairs than concepts from the game theory, like zero-sum, or win-win, or geology, shifting tectonic plates. Yet they perfectly capture the nature of politics, its drama. And here in London, of William Shakespeare, I do not have to explain it. All the world is a stage. My speechwriter thought I couldn't go further, but I completed it. All the world is a stage, and all men and women are merely players. They have their exits and their entrances. The exit is a word that I avoid these days. First trend, the global stage is getting more crowded. The rise of the emerging powers is striking. Rising powers, by the way, and not just rising economies, although the two tend to coincide. The symbolic turning point was the establishment late 2008 of the G20 at the highest level, at the summit level. Dozens of other emerging powers are queuing up behind them. We have not yet fully assimilated this deep change. Some people call it the de-Westernization. I prefer to speak about the loss of certain monopolies we have held for 2 centuries, economically and politically, even if there was no homogeneous we, and I spoke about we in the West, if there was no homogeneous we in the West. It is a relative decline, which it would be counterproductive to deny. And for humanity as a whole, it is not bad news. It has allowed hundreds of millions of people to climb out of poverty. And another nuance, the loss of monopoly does not mean the loss of all power. The West still has major assets, and the new players are less united than they pretend to be. And they too face huge internal challenges, political as well as economical. Second trend, the public comes closer to the stage than ever before. And one key aspect is the communication revolution. Just as the French Revolution was the work of pen and ink, the famous word. Just as the fall of the Iron Curtain in Eastern Europe was helped by radio and television. So today, some regimes fear the mobilizing force of the internet, social networks and mobile phones. Of course, a communication tool does not determine a struggle's outcome. But as the Arab Spring and the Chinese anti-corruption protests show, it can empower individuals and civil societies. When the audience starts booing, any leader actor stands on shaky ground. People across the world are asking for jobs and justice and a say in their country's politics. This democratic wave will roll in or roll on. We have not seen the end yet. It is irreversible. The communication revolution will put a heavy burden on some regimes among the emerging powers. Russia and China's position on the Syrian uprising shows that they cling to the past. History is on the side of democracy. The fear of radical Islam should not retain us from supporting the democratic revolutions and engaging with the new Arab governments, including, whatever the election results, Egypt. This brings me to the third trend. The nature of the play is changing. Power and influence in the world are more and more a matter of economy and less of weapons. The BRICS, China in the lead, inspire EU more for their production performances and their trillions of foreign reserves than for the size of their army. On the American side, the experiences of both Iraq and Afghanistan have clearly demonstrated the limits of military power, as the United States has recognized itself. The global economic scramble for markets and resources is still about confrontation and competition. It is, at the risk of distorting the thought of Clausewitz, the continuation of politics with other means. In that respect, the old play of rivalry is still on. Yet there is one vital difference: today's global economic interdependence, not only inside the Eurozone, all over the world. The major powers cannot achieve prosperity by undermining each other, and that is new. From these three forceful trends, I draw three conclusions for the European Union's member states. First conclusion, on a crowded global stage, it makes even more sense to work together as a club. It also forces us to pick our priorities carefully. In my view, this means a focus on security in a broad sense, first and foremost in our wider neighborhood, and on prosperity in cooperation with our partners. Second, in a world where public scrutiny plays an ever stronger role, we must defend our democratic values. Scrutiny also applies to us, so credibility requires consistency. And the third trend for our member states, faced with the new play of global interdependence and global governance, we need a presence in all the world's regions. Take a hot example. Europe is clearly not a Pacific power and will not become one. Geography still matters. Yet, as the single largest trade partner of the major East Asian economies, we not only have a stake in the region's stability, but also contribute to it. And that's why Europe must remain globally engaged. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Europe has a role to play, politically, economically, and also militarily. And in most cases, European countries can perform better by working jointly. Naturally, the United Kingdom is a country with an outstanding diplomacy, a top army, and a great tradition of strategic thinking, unrivaled in Europe, ou presque. Purely coincidence that they spoke French. So, here in London, you may sometimes wonder, why go through the EU now and even more so in the future? Why share confidential information with 26 other countries? How to avoid the risk of scaling down ambitions or wasting time on internal coordination instead of responding swiftly to events? What do we get in terms of result? Not to mention conspiracy theories as if Brussels could take away the UK's and France's Security Council seats. The last one aside, these are fair questions. But there is a clear case to be made. We in Europe share the same basic concerns and broadly the same interests. the security and prosperity of our citizens holding up certain values also. The European Union offers added value in terms of effectiveness, cost, and legitimacy. The Union is not about giving up your own role. No, it is about leveraging our strengths by aligning our positions, pooling resources, acting in the world as a club, and increasingly as a team. Even if, for not having its own army, the European Union is seen as using mainly soft means, we achieve pretty hard goals. Let me give some examples on security. There's the Union's most vital work has been to stabilize our continent, above all through enlargement, by opening up a promising perspective after a period of dictatorship in Southern Europe, of Soviet rule, Central Europe, and of a civil war, the Balkans. Ensuring that the Western Balkans' future will be European is one of the priorities in my second mandate. In its wider neighbourhood also, the European Union is the most legitimate actor. The Georgia War in 2008 was a clear case. French former President Sarkozy, who was holding the EU presidency at that time, played the European card in brokering a truce. Once it was established, it was the EU which sent a peace mission to observe the Georgian-Russian border. Politically speaking, NATO could not have done it. Another case was last year's intervention in Libya. At stake was the defense not just of peace on our continent, but of European values. European leaders had to do their utmost to prevent a bloodbath just across the Mediterranean. We held an emergency EU summit, the 11th of March, 2010, which paved the way of the international intervention a week later, based on a UN Security Council resolution and support of the Arab League. I remember speaking to a president from an emerging country a few months later, who was going on about oil and commercial interests. I told him about the scars of Srebrenica, and it really seemed an eye-opener to him. And now we have to step up pressure on the Syrian regime to stop the unacceptable violence. The European Union is fully united behind the Annan Plan and is pushing for its adoption in all its aspects. This is one of the issues I will raise with President Putin next Monday when we meet for the biannual EU-Russia summit. Obviously, we also use economic and political means to achieve security goals. The sanctions, oil embargo, the EU imposed against Iran's nuclear military program were followed by countries around the world and helped bring Iran back to the negotiating table. The efforts are ongoing, and as you know, the EU's High Representative Catherine Ashton is skillfully chairing the talks between Tehran and the 6 countries. To conclude on security, 2 remarks on the transatlantic relationship. First, the Libya intervention showed a new burden sharing. It made sense for Europe to take the lead in our own vicinity. Of course, we discovered that we will still need American assistance, if not to win the war, at least to win the battle with overwhelming force. It was a wake-up call for all of us. Some concrete progress on pooling and sharing of European military capabilities has been made since then. But as I stressed at the NATO summit, much more needs to be done. Secondly, even if there has been much talk of the pivot to Asia, the United States emphasizing its role as Pacific power, the transatlantic relation remains vital for both sides. From what I see, Americans realize that the pivot is not an alternative to Europe and NATO. On the contrary, a strong transatlantic relationship is a precondition for America's focus on Asia, and in that respect, the West still exists. Ladies and gentlemen, let's go back to some of the economic issues. Access to our common market, the world's largest, is much sought after price. From our side, trade with the rest of the world is a key engine for growth. We have a number of trade agreements which either just entered into force, South Korea is a good example, or underway, like Japan, hopefully soon, India, Indonesia. And we are looking at further opening trade with the United States. Trade is still the best example of how Europeans gain considerable weight by a strong common approach. Trade is not just an engine for growth, but also for change. As we see in our relations with our eastern neighbors, such as Ukraine and Georgia, Moldova, the pull power of the Union should not be underestimated. The stronger their commitments to genuine reform, the more they can count on the European Union. And as I said to the Ukrainian leadership recently, this works both ways. Not just more for more, but also less for less. Trade and the rule of law are also high on the agenda in our relations with Russia. Russia's modernization is not only important economically, it can also bring further democratic evolutions in Russian society and is a geostrategic interest for all neighboring countries. Of course, trade has to be a two-way street. It is important that all players abide by the same rules and that disputes can be settled. Europe is ready to use the enforcement mechanism to the full. Remember the recent WTO complaint against China on rare earths, which we launched together with the United States and Japan, by the way. And I'm confident that Beijing will comply. Recently, some member states have emphasized the commercial dimension of diplomatic relations. This is understandable, especially in times of economic crisis. However, we should not end up with a good cup, bad cup division of labor, with national representatives doing the rounds as salesmen, leaving it to the European Union institutions to be firm on the rules of the economic game and on the respect of human rights. That's too easy. As I pointed out on numerous occasions to colleagues, in that scenario, we'd all lose out. We need to play our hand tactically. I should like to stress that we already are a club of states in the world, a union, and perceived as such by the others. The Europeans share a certain vision and approach different from that of the Russians, the Chinese, the Japanese, or even to some extent the Americans. How to explain this set of shared ideas and practices? You could plunge in the history books and detect a mix of Renaissance curiosity, imperial pride, and post-colonial prudence. However, just as important has been our intense internal diplomatic cooperation. Over 40 years, the diplomacies of our member states have become used to working together. By now, it has become a reflex and produced a distinctive European method and doctrine. The creation of a European diplomatic service was therefore not a revolutionary step. No, it builds on existing achievements. Sure, all member states do not share every position on every issue. But single disagreements, for instance on the Palestinian statehood, should not be seen as a proof that Europe lacks a common foreign policy. The fact is that today in the dangerous hotspots in the world, such as Syria, Iran, or the Israeli-Palestine conflict, the 27 very easily find common positions, sometimes within hours. We work together in climate conferences, on development aid. By the way, we are the biggest donor on development aid in the world. In crisis missions all over the world, from Afghanistan to Somalia. The synergy between national diplomacies and the Brussels institutions is accelerating under the double pressure of the financial crisis and the changing outside world. We must do better with less. I see the progress on the ground whenever I travel, for instance, to Washington, Beijing or Pretoria. Information sharing is intensifying. In the past months, a handful of member states have asked whether EU delegations could represent their own country in certain capitals, and mind you, not only debt-struck governments. An issue like co-location of embassies may sound prosaic, but such signs reveal something essential, that mutual trust is there and growing. Ladies and gentlemen, now is the time to build on this confidence. European foreign policy is a daily reality of the 27 member states. The financial and economic crisis, deep as it is, does not stop that. Yet overcoming the crisis is an absolute prerequisite for much else. Restoring the Eurozone stability is indispensable for us to punch our full weight at the global stage. And I'm convinced that for that, we also have to structurally increase our economic growth. Even if it is perfectly normal that mature economies grow more slowly than emerging ones, a potential growth of 1.5% is simply too low. We must focus, therefore, internally as much on growth as on stability. The world is looking at us. Our efforts to overcome the crisis have become a key issue in our dealings with international partners. Explaining our course of action, the political constraints under which we work, reassuring our partners on our ability to keep moving forward, these are among our highest foreign policy priorities at the moment. It also involves making the case that the Eurozone is not the only region having to adjust its internal balances. So have the others, and the United States and China have to deal with big external imbalances on top of it. Maintaining strong relations and mutual trust with our international partners will be key for the recovery of our economies. In such times, a strong diplomacy isn't a luxury we could be tempted to disregard, but an absolute necessity. It concerns each and every member state. Ladies and gentlemen, since the 50s, member states have always intensified their cooperation as a result of ideas and ideals on the one hand, sheer necessity on the other hand. Once again today, the pressure of events is huge, financially and globally. It is said that when you look from inside the European Union, you see smaller and bigger European countries. When you look from Washington or Beijing, you basically see small countries. That may be an exaggeration, but it contains an element of truth which we are all somewhat reluctant to admit. But then again, in the end, we live together on this continent and face the same challenges, and I add, the same destinies. Together, we have significant weight, and we can be a force for a more prosperous and free world. Also, on today's crowded stage, that remains Europe's role. Thank you.